The dust had barely settled from the eastbound train when the young woman stepped onto the platform at Nebraska City, Nebraska. Her threadbare carpetbag clutched tight against her chest like a shield against the scorching August heat of 1879. She moved with the calculated grace of someone who had learned to become invisible, her eyes scanning the station house while her heart hammered against her ribs, knowing that the name she was about to give would either save her life or end it right here among the tumbleweeds and weathered wood. The station master, a portly man with spectacles perched on his sunburned nose, glanced up from his ledger as she approached the counter. "Need something, miss?" Her throat felt like sandpaper. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times during the 3-day journey from St. Louis, whispering the false name until it almost felt real. "I'm here about the teaching position. I sent a letter last month." The words came out steady, stronger than she felt. "Name." He dipped his pen in ink, waiting. This was it, the point of no return. "Catherine Winters," she said, borrowing the identity of a woman she had found in an obituary section of a discarded newspaper. Someone who had died of consumption in a Denver boarding house 6 months prior, far enough away that news traveled slow. A woman with no family listed in the brief mention of her passing. The station master consulted his papers, running a thick finger down a list. Winters. Ah, yes, Miss Catherine Winters. We got your references from that school in Denver. The superintendent said you can start Monday. Boarding house is 2 streets over, run by Mrs. Haversham. She's expecting you." Relief flooded through her so powerfully she had to grip the counter to stay upright. It had worked. They believed her. She was no longer Josephine Carver, the girl who had witnessed her employer's murder in St. Louis and fled before the killer could tie up that loose end. She was Catherine Winters now, schoolteacher, respectable and unremarkable. "Thank you," she managed, taking the paper he slid across the counter with directions to the boarding house. She did not see the cowboy watching from the shadows of the station platform, his weathered hat pulled low, his sharp gray eyes taking in every detail of her nervous movements. Zachary Holbrook had been leaning against the post for the better part of an hour, waiting for his ranch foreman to arrive on that same train, and he had heard every word she spoke. More importantly, he had seen the way her hands trembled when she gave that name, the way her eyes darted toward the door as if measuring escape routes. Zachary had not spent 15 years building his ranch from nothing without learning to read people. This woman was running from something, and she was lying about who she was. The question that interested him more than it should have was why. He watched her walk down the dusty Main Street, her shoulders squared despite the obvious exhaustion in her gait. Most women who came west alone were either desperate or determined. She seemed to be both. Something about that combination stirred his curiosity in a way nothing had for years, not since he had buried his ambitions for anything beyond keeping his land profitable and his cowboys paid. The Nebraska summer sun beat down mercilessly as Josephine made her way to the boarding house, trying not to stare too obviously at the town that would be her new home. Nebraska City sprawled along the Missouri River, a jumping-off point for settlers heading further west. The main street bustled with activity despite the heat. Wagons loaded with supplies, men in dust-covered boots discussing cattle prices, women with parasols ducking into the general store. It was bigger than she had expected, civilized enough to need a schoolteacher but rough enough around the edges that maybe, just maybe, no one would look too closely at her past. Mrs. Haversham turned out to be a reed-thin woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "You look half dead, dear. Let me show you to your room and you can rest before supper. Teaching position doesn't start until Monday, so you have a few days to settle in." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Josephine set her carpetbag down and sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of the last 2 weeks. She had watched Mr. Thornton, the banker she had worked for as a household clerk, get shot in his own study by a man demanding access to the safe. She had been in the hallway, had seen everything through the crack in the door, and when the killer's eyes had swept the room afterward, she had known with absolute certainty that he would come for her next. She had run that very night, taking only what she could carry and the small savings she had accumulated. The obituary for Catherine Winters had been a gift from Providence, or perhaps desperation's own cunning. A woman roughly her age, with teaching experience, recently deceased with no family to contradict the stolen identity. Now she was here, in a town where no one knew Josephine Carver had ever existed. She would teach children, live quietly, and pray that distance and a new name would be enough. Sunday services at the white-painted church gave Josephine her first real look at the community. She sat in the back pew, wearing her best dress, which was still worn at the cuffs, and tried to blend into the wooden bench. The congregation was a mix of farmers, shopkeepers, and ranchers, their families filling the pews with the rustle of Sunday clothes and whispered conversations. That was when she saw him for the second time. Zachary Holbrook sat 3 rows ahead, his broad shoulders unmistakable even in a pressed white shirt and clean vest. His dark hair was neatly combed, such a contrast to the dusty cowboys around him that he stood out despite his attempt to look ordinary. But what made her breath catch was the moment he turned his head slightly, and she realized with a jolt of recognition that he had been at the station. She remembered seeing him there, a figure in the shadows, though she had been too focused on her own deception to pay much attention. Had he heard her? Had he noticed anything? The service passed in a blur of anxiety. When the final hymn ended and people began filing out into the bright morning, Josephine tried to slip away quickly, but Mrs. Haversham had other ideas. "Catherine, dear, let me introduce you to some folks. You'll be teaching their children come Monday." The older woman's grip on her arm was surprisingly firm. There was no escape. Josephine found herself swept into a tide of introductions. The blacksmith's wife, the shopkeeper's family, the doctor's daughter. Names and faces blurred together until Mrs. Haversham steered her directly toward the tall cowboy who had been watching her with those unsettling gray eyes. "Mr. Holbrook, this is our new schoolteacher, Miss Catherine Winters." "Miss Winters, Zachary Holbrook owns the Double H Ranch north of town. Biggest spread in the county." Zachary removed his hat, revealing a face that was all hard angles and sun-weathered lines, probably in his early 30s. But his eyes held something unexpected, intelligence and a hint of amusement that made Josephine's stomach drop. "Miss Winters, pleasure to meet you. I heard you arrived Friday." "Yes," she said carefully, "on the afternoon train. Long journey from Denver." Her heart skipped. Why would he mention Denver specifically? "Long enough," she replied, keeping her voice neutral, "but I'm grateful for the opportunity. Teaching is noble work. We need good educators out here." His tone was perfectly polite, but something in the way he studied her face made her feel exposed, as if he could see straight through Catherine Winters to the frightened girl underneath. "I hope to serve the community well," she said, then added desperately, "If you'll excuse me, I promised Mrs. Haversham I would help with the church social preparations." She fled before he could respond, feeling his gaze follow her across the churchyard. That evening, as she sat in her room preparing lessons for the coming week, Josephine tried to shake off the encounter. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe Zachary Holbrook was just a rancher making small talk with the new schoolteacher. But the way he had looked at her, the specific mention of Denver, the timing of seeing him at the station, it all felt too deliberate to be coincidence. She could not afford suspicion. Not now, not when she was so close to building a new life. Monday morning arrived with a brilliant sunrise that painted the prairie gold. Josephine walked to the schoolhouse with her heart in her throat, reminding herself that she had actually attended normal school for 2 years before family circumstances had forced her to find work instead. She was qualified to teach, even if the name she was using was not her own. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of wooden desks and a blackboard at the front. 15 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old filed in over the next half hour, eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She recognized several faces from church. "Good morning," she said, writing Miss Winters on the blackboard in careful script. "I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you. Let's begin by going around the room. Please tell me your name and one thing you hope to learn this year." The day passed in the familiar rhythm of lessons and recitations. By the time she dismissed the students at 3 o'clock, Josephine felt more like herself than she had in weeks. This, at least, was real. Her ability to teach was not borrowed or stolen. It was genuinely hers. She was erasing the blackboard when a shadow fell across the doorway. Zachary Holbrook stood there, hat in hand, looking too large for the small schoolhouse. "Miss Winters, hope I'm not interrupting. The children have gone home for the day." She set down the eraser, wiping chalk dust from her hands. "Was there something you needed, Mr. Holbrook?" "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." He stepped inside, and suddenly the room felt much smaller. "It's about Friday, at the station." Her blood ran cold. "What about it?" "I was there when you arrived. I heard you give your name to the station master." He paused, and the silence stretched like wire about to snap. "Catherine Winters died 6 months ago in Denver. Consumption." There was a notice in the Rocky Mountain News. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Of all the people in Nebraska City, of all the possible witnesses to her arrival, it had to be someone who had seen that obituary, someone who knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice came out too thin, too desperate. "Yes, you do." Zachary's tone was not unkind, but it was firm. "I do business all over, subscribe to newspapers from Denver to Omaha. I happened to see that obituary a few months back because I was looking for a cattle buyer named Winters. Different person entirely, but the name stuck in my memory." Josephine sank into the chair behind the teacher's desk, all her careful plans crumbling like sand. "Are you going to tell the sheriff?" "That depends." He pulled up a student's chair and sat down, somehow managing to look at ease despite the too small furniture. "What are you running from?" "If you murdered someone, that's one thing. If someone's trying to murder you, that's entirely different." She looked at him sharply. "Why would you assume the second?" "Because I've seen plenty of criminals in my time, and they don't usually look scared. They look mean or desperate or calculating." "You looked terrified when you gave that name. You still look terrified right now. So I'll ask again. What are you running from?" The kindness in his voice was nearly her undoing. She had been so alone with this fear for so long that the temptation to tell someone, to share the burden, was almost overwhelming. But trusting the wrong person could get her killed. "Why do you care?" she asked instead. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure." He leaned back, studying her with those sharp gray eyes. "Maybe because I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by circumstances. Maybe because I've got a soft spot for someone trying to make an honest living despite a bad situation. Or maybe because when I saw you on that platform, something in me recognized something in you. Survival instinct, determination, the kind of strength it takes to keep going when everything says quit. That's quite a lot to read from a stranger on a train platform. I'm good at reading people. It's kept me alive and profitable for 15 years in a business where plenty of men go under. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Look, miss, whoever you really are, I'm not your enemy. But if you're going to stay in this town, you should know that at least one person knows your secret. And you should probably consider whether having someone on your side might be useful. Josephine's mind raced. He could destroy everything with a single conversation with the sheriff or the school superintendent, but he had not done that yet. He had come here privately, giving her a chance to explain. That meant something. If I tell you, she said slowly, how do I know you won't use it against me? You don't. But you don't have much choice either. His bluntness was startling. I could go to the authorities right now if I wanted to. I'm not, because I'd like to hear your side first. Seems fair. She took a deep breath. My real name is Josephine Carver. I worked as a household clerk for a banker in St. Louis, Mr. Thornton. 2 weeks ago, a man broke into the study and demanded Mr. Thornton open the safe. When Mr. Thornton refused, the man shot him. I saw it happen through a crack in the door. The killer looked around afterward, and I think he saw me, or at least knew someone might have been there. I ran that same night. I've been running ever since. Zachary's expression had gone very still. Did you recognize the man who did it? Not by name, but I'd know his face anywhere. He had a scar across his left eyebrow and wore a ring with a red stone. You went to the law in St. Louis. Mr. Thornton was wealthy and connected, but there were rumors he'd made enemies in business. I didn't know who to trust, and I was afraid that if I stayed to testify, the killer would find me first. I know it was cowardly, it was smart, Zachary interrupted. If this man was willing to kill a banker, he'd have no qualms about silencing a witness. You did what you had to do to survive. He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. So you found Catherine Winters's obituary and borrowed her identity. I'm not proud of it, but I needed work, needed a reason to be somewhere. Teaching was the only respectable option I had the qualifications for. And now you're stuck being Catherine Winters, at least for the foreseeable future. Unless you plan to expose me. She met his gaze directly. I should tell you that I'm a good teacher. Those children deserve someone who cares about their education, and I do. If you turn me in, they'll get whoever the county can scrape up next, and it might be months before someone else arrives. But I'll understand if you feel you have to tell the truth. Zachary stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, the prairie stretched endless under the late afternoon sun. Here's what I think. I think Josephine Carver is dead as far as anyone in Nebraska needs to know. Catherine Winters is our new school teacher, and she's going to do a fine job. And I'm going to make sure nobody looks too closely at her past. Josephine's breath caught. Why would you do that? He turned back to her, and there was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable that he usually kept hidden. Because 10 years ago, I killed a man in Texas. He was cheating at cards and pulled a gun when I called him on it. It was self-defense, clear as day, but his brother was the sheriff. I left town that night with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. Changed my name. Holbrook isn't what I was born with, and came north. Built the double H from dirt and determination. So you see, Miss Winters, we're not so different, you and I. Sometimes a new name is the only chance we get at a new life. The confession hung in the air between them, a shared secret that changed everything. Josephine stood up slowly, moving closer to him. You're telling me this so I'll know you understand. I'm telling you this so you'll know you can trust me, and so you'll know I've got as much to lose as you do if certain truths come out. His gray eyes held her steadily. I'm also telling you because I think you might need a friend in this town, and I'm volunteering for the position. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. because when I saw you at that station, something woke up in me that I thought was long dead. Hope, maybe, or possibility. I've spent a decade building a ranch and keeping my head down and not letting anyone get close enough to matter. Then you walked onto that platform looking like you carried the whole world on your shoulders, and I thought. He stopped, shaking his head. Hell, I don't know what I thought. But I'd like the chance to find out. Josephine's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was dangerous for so many reasons. Getting close to anyone risked her secrets coming to light. But Zachary already knew her secrets, and he was offering something she had not dared hope for: protection, friendship, maybe even something more. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I've been alone for so long. Then we'll figure it out together. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, warm and solid. For now, how about this? I'll come by the schoolhouse a few times a week to check on things. Make sure the building's in good repair, chop wood for the stove when winter comes, that sort of thing. Give people a reason to see me around without raising eyebrows. And meanwhile, we'll get to know each other properly. As friends, she said, but her hand tightened around his. As whatever we want to be. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. No pressure, no expectations, just two people with complicated pasts trying to make something good out of what they've got left. It was not a declaration of love or even romance, but it was honest, and honesty was something Josephine had not experienced in weeks. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Zachary squeezed her hand once more, then released it and stepped back. I should go. Ranch doesn't run itself. But I'll see you Wednesday if that suits. There's a loose board on the front step I noticed. Wednesday, she agreed. He settled his hat on his head and touched the brim in farewell, then walked out into the golden evening light. Josephine watched him go, her hand still tingling where he had held it, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. She had come to Nebraska City expecting to hide forever, to live a half-life under a borrowed name. Instead, within 3 days, someone had seen through her disguise and offered not exposure but protection. Offered friendship, possibly more, with full knowledge of who she really was. It felt like being given a second chance at being human. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Josephine taught her students with growing confidence, and they responded with the resilience of prairie children who understood that education was a privilege. She prepared lessons in the evenings, ate meals at Mrs. Haversham's boarding house, and attended church on Sundays. And every Wednesday and Saturday, Zachary Holbrook found a reason to visit the schoolhouse. True to his word, he started with practical matters. He fixed the loose step, then the window that stuck, then the stove pipe that was not drawing properly. But increasingly he would linger after the work was done, and they would talk. Sometimes about inconsequential things, the weather, the town gossip, his ranch operations. Sometimes about deeper matters, books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they had given up or were learning to dream again. Josephine found herself waiting for those visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. She would catch herself glancing toward the door during afternoon lessons, hoping to see his tall figure appear. When he did arrive, her heart would lift in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man himself. Zachary was different from anyone she had ever known. He was quiet but not withdrawn, strong but not domineering. He listened when she talked, really listened as if her thoughts mattered. And when he spoke about his ranch or his life, there was a passion beneath the practical words, a love for the land and the work that resonated with her own dedication to teaching. One Saturday in early September, after he had finished restacking the firewood for winter, Josephine impulsively asked if he would like to stay for coffee. Mrs. Haversham had sent her with extra that morning, knowing Josephine sometimes worked late preparing lessons. "If it's not an imposition," Zachary said, but his slight smile suggested he was pleased by the invitation. They sat on the school steps, cups in hand, watching the prairie grass ripple in the breeze. The late afternoon sun turned everything gold and amber, the kind of light that made even ordinary moments feel significant. "Tell me something true," Josephine said suddenly. "Something you've never told anyone else." Zachary was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Sometimes I'm afraid this is all I'll ever be, a rancher in Nebraska with a past I can't acknowledge. I thought when I came here that I'd build something for a few years and then move on, maybe to California or up to Montana. But I put down roots and now I'm not sure I could leave even if I wanted to. Is that a bad thing, having roots? It is if you're always looking over your shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up." He glanced at her. "You must know what I mean." She did. "Every time someone new comes to town, I wonder if they'll recognize me. Not as Josephine necessarily, but as someone who doesn't quite belong. Someone playing a part." "You belong here," Zachary said firmly. "Those kids adore you. Mrs. Haversham talks about you like you're her own daughter. Hell, even the town gossips can't find anything bad to say about you, and that's a minor miracle. They would if they knew the truth. The truth is that you're a woman who survived something terrible and made a life out of scraps and determination. That's nothing to be ashamed of." He set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "Josephine, can I call you that when we're alone?" Her real name in his voice made her chest tighten with emotion. "Yes. Josephine, I want you to know something. What I'm starting to feel for you has nothing to do with secrets or shared pasts or any of that. It's about who you are right now, today. The way you laugh when one of your students makes a clever joke. The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on a lesson plan. The way you see the good in people even after everything you've been through." He reached out and carefully tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm falling for you, and I needed you to know that before this goes any further." Josephine's breath caught. She had known, on some level, that they were moving toward something more than friendship. But hearing him say it out loud, with such plain honesty, made it real in a way that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "I'm falling for you too," she whispered. "But I'm scared. What if someone finds out about me? What if I have to run again? I can't ask you to, you're not asking, I'm offering." Zachary cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what I want. If you want it too, I do." The words came out fierce and certain. "I want that more than anything." He kissed her then, soft and careful as if she might break. But when she kissed him back, wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him closer, the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. Like safety and passion and promise all tangled together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Well then, Miss Winters, I suppose this means we're courting." She laughed, the sound bright with joy and relief. "I suppose it does, Mr. Holbrook." News of the courtship spread through Nebraska City with the speed of prairie fire. By the following week, everyone knew that Zachary Holbrook was courting the new schoolteacher, and opinions were decidedly mixed. Some approved wholeheartedly Zachary was a respected rancher and Josephine a respectable teacher. Others whispered that it was too fast, that they barely knew each other, that a woman so new to town might have questionable motives. Mrs. Haversham, however, was delighted. "I knew it the moment I saw him fixing that step," she told Josephine over breakfast. A man doesn't spend that much time on carpentry unless he's interested in more than woodwork. Josephine blushed but could not suppress her smile. The happiness bubbling inside her felt almost dangerous in its intensity, as if acknowledging it too fully might make it disappear. Zachary courted her properly, mindful of her reputation in the community. He took her on chaperoned buggy rides through the countryside, showing her the vast expanse of his ranch and explaining his plans for expanding the herd. He attended church socials by her side, enduring the scrutiny of the town with good-natured patience. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry from the general store, wildflowers picked from the prairie, a new slate for the schoolhouse. But it was the private moments Josephine treasured most, the conversations that stretched long into the evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with such tenderness it made her heart ache. The stolen kisses behind the schoolhouse, quick and sweet and full of promise. In October, when the prairie turned gold and crimson with autumn, Zachary asked her to marry him. They were riding in his buggy, returning from a Sunday picnic, when he pulled the horses to a stop on a ridge overlooking the Missouri River. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost unreal in their beauty. "I know it hasn't been long," Zachary said, taking her hand. "By conventional standards, maybe not long enough. But I'm not a young man anymore, and I've learned that when you find something worth holding on to, you don't let it slip away because of what other people might think." Josephine's pulse quickened. "Zachary, let me finish." His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I love you, Josephine, not Catherine, not the name you use for the world, but you. The woman who is brave enough to start over, stubborn enough to keep going when everything says quit, and kind enough to care about a bunch of prairie kids who need someone to believe in them. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not one based on hiding or fear. I know you're scared. Hell, I'm scared too, but I'd rather face the world with you than face another day alone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice?" Tears were streaming down Josephine's face, but she was smiling so wide it almost hurt. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, and then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a desperation that spoke of all the loneliness he had carried for so long. She kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring everything she felt into that moment. Love and gratitude and hope, and a fierce determination that they would make this work, no matter what came. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Zachary said, "I should tell you the preacher can do the ceremony as soon as we want. I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd let me. People will talk if we rush. People are going to talk anyway. Might as well give them something worth gossiping about." Josephine considered. The practical part of her said to wait, to do things properly. But the part of her that had been running and hiding for months wanted nothing more than to grab this happiness with both hands and hold on tight. 2 weeks, she said. "That's enough time to have the bands read and make a few preparations, but not so long that I lose my nerve." "You won't lose your nerve. You're the bravest woman I know." He kissed her forehead tenderly. 2 weeks it is, and then you'll be Mrs. Holbrook. Mrs. Holbrook. Not Catherine Winters or Josephine Carver, but someone entirely new. A woman who belonged to herself and to the man she loved. The thought filled her with a peace she had not felt in longer than she could remember. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Mrs. Haversham took charge of organizing a simple reception at the boarding house, insisting that it was the least she could do for her favorite boarder. The women of the town, whatever their private opinions about the hasty courtship, rallied to help Josephine prepare. They brought fabric for a dress, recipes for the wedding breakfast, advice on everything from housekeeping to married life. Josephine found herself unexpectedly moved by their kindness. These women had no idea who she really was, but they were welcoming her into their community anyway. It made the deception harder to bear, but it also reminded her why she had chosen this life in the first place. There was goodness here, genuine human connection, the kind of belonging she had always craved. The night before the wedding, as she lay in bed unable to sleep, Josephine allowed herself to think about what came next. She would move to Zachary's ranch, a substantial house he had built himself 5 miles north of town. She would leave teaching. At least for now, married women rarely continued as schoolteachers. She would become a rancher's wife, learning to run a household on the frontier, possibly raising children if they were blessed that way. It was a life completely different from anything she had imagined for herself. But it was real, and it was hers, and tomorrow she would claim it fully. The wedding took place on a brilliant November morning in the small church where Josephine had first seen Zachary. She wore a dress of pale blue calico that Mrs. Haversham's daughter had helped her sew, her hair pinned up with wildflowers that were among the last blooms before winter. She had no family to walk her down the aisle, so the doctor's wife, Mrs. Patterson, who had been especially kind to her, offered to stand with her. Zachary waited at the altar in a new suit, his dark hair slicked back, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. But when their eyes met as she walked down the aisle, his whole face transformed with such joy and love that Josephine nearly stumbled. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. The preacher read from Corinthians about love being patient and kind. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. When Zachary slipped the wedding band onto her finger beside the engagement ring, his hand trembled slightly. "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Zachary cupped her face in his hands and kissed her softly, tenderly, as if sealing a sacred promise. The small congregation applauded, and Josephine laughed against his lips, giddy with happiness. They were married. She was Mrs. Zachary Holbrook. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The reception at the boarding house was a cheerful affair with cake and punch, and well wishes from what seemed like half the town. Josephine smiled until her face hurt, thanked people for their gifts and blessings, and tried to ignore the occasional whispered comment about how quickly everything had happened. Finally, as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, Zachary leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Holbrook, home." The words settled into her heart like a benediction. Yes, let's go home. The ride to the ranch passed in comfortable silence, their hands clasped together. Josephine studied the landscape with new eyes now that it was hers, the rolling prairie, the copse of cottonwoods marking the creek that ran through Zachary's property, the sturdy wooden house that came into view as they crested a hill. The house was larger than she had expected, 2 stories with a wide porch and real glass windows. Zachary had clearly put thought and care into building it, even when he had no one to share it with. "I always hoped I'd bring a wife here someday," he said as he helped her down from the buggy. "But I'd given up believing it would actually happen. Then you stepped off that train and changed everything." Before she could respond, he swept her up into his arms, carrying her across the threshold in the traditional manner. Josephine laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. Some traditions are worth keeping." He set her down gently inside the front hall, then immediately pulled her close and kissed her deeply. This kiss was different from the ones before, hungrier, more urgent, carrying the promise of the night ahead. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary said roughly, "I should show you the house. Give you time to get settled." But Josephine shook her head, her fingers already working the buttons of his vest. "I don't need time, I need you." His eyes darkened with desire, but he caught her hands gently. "Are you sure? I don't want to rush you." "Zachary, we've been waiting for this since the day we met. I'm your wife now. I want to be your wife in every way." She rose on her toes and kissed him with all the passion she had been holding back during their courtship. "Take me to bed." He needed no further encouragement. He led her up the stairs to the bedroom, where a large quilt-covered bed dominated the space. The room was simple but comfortable, with curtains fluttering in the breeze from the partially open window. What followed was tender and passionate by turns, a claiming and a giving that left them both breathless. Zachary was patient and careful, mindful that this was her first time, making sure she felt nothing but pleasure. And when they finally came together fully, Josephine felt something break open inside her, all the walls she had built around her heart crumbling under the force of what she felt for this man. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. Josephine traced idle patterns on his skin, marveling at how natural this felt, how right. "I love you," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "I don't think I've said it enough, but I do, so much it scares me sometimes." Zachary tipped her face up to his, kissing her forehead, her nose, her lips. "I love you too, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." He paused, then added quietly, "I want you to know something. When I married you today, I married Josephine Carver, not Catherine Winters. The woman I love is the real you, and that's who I pledged my life to." Tears pricked her eyes. "But the world knows me as Catherine. The world can know you however you need to be known, but here in this house you'll always be Josephine to me, my Josephine." His arms tightened around her. "No more running, no more hiding. This is home now, and no one is going to take that away from us." She believed him. Against all logic, against the lingering fear that still whispered in the back of her mind, she believed that they could make this work, that love might actually be enough. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Josephine had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, which were entirely different from teaching. Zachary employed 5 permanent cowboys who lived in the bunkhouse and several more seasonal workers during roundup. She became responsible for cooking not just for herself and Zachary, but for feeding the crew when needed, managing the household accounts, and maintaining the garden that would provide vegetables through the long winter. It was hard work, harder than teaching in many ways. But Josephine threw herself into it with characteristic determination. She learned to make biscuits that did not come out like rocks, to preserve fruit and vegetables, to manage the chickens and milk cow. The cowboys were respectful but cautious around her at first, unsure of this new presence in their boss's life. But gradually they warmed to her, especially when they realized she did not put on airs and was willing to learn. Zachary was patient with her mistakes and celebrated her successes. He came in from long days checking fence lines or moving cattle to find her attempting some new recipe or household task, and he always made her feel like she was the most capable woman in Nebraska, even when they both knew she was still learning. But more than the work, what made Josephine happy was the simple fact of being with him. They would sit together in the evenings, her reading aloud from books while he mended tack or worked on accounts. They would talk about everything and nothing, sharing their days, their thoughts, their dreams. They made love with a passion that never seemed to diminish, finding joy in each other's bodies and comfort in each other's arms. Winter came early that year. sweeping down from the north in late December with blizzards that left snowdrifts taller than a man. The ranch work became brutally difficult, breaking ice in water troughs, ensuring the cattle had access to hay, making sure no one got frostbitten during the daily chores. But inside the house, with a fire crackling in the hearth and Zachary beside her, Josephine felt safer and happier than she ever had in her life. It was during one of those long, snowbound January evenings in 1880 that she realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she finally worked up the courage to tell Zachary, he was in the barn checking on a mare that was about to foal. She found him in the stall, running experienced hands over the horse's swollen belly. "Everything looks good," he said without turning around. "She should drop this foal any day now, Zachary." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He turned immediately, concern flickering across his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, at least I don't think so." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her. Then a grin spread across his face, so wide and genuine that it transformed him completely. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing the doctor. All the signs are there." He set her down carefully as if she had suddenly become made of glass. His hands went to her still flat belly, pressing gently. "When?" "Late summer, I think. August, maybe early September. A baby." He shook his head, eyes bright with emotion. "I never let myself hope for this. I thought after everything, after the life I've led, I didn't deserve this kind of happiness." Josephine covered his hands with hers. "You deserve every good thing, and you're going to be a wonderful father. I'm going to try." He pulled her close, cradling her against his chest. "God, Josephine, I'm so happy I can barely breathe." She held him tight, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her ear. A baby. Their baby. A new life created from their love, someone who would belong to both of them and this land. It felt like the final piece of the life they were building together. Dr. Patterson confirmed the pregnancy a week later, pronouncing Josephine healthy and advising her to continue her normal activities while being mindful not to overdo things as she grew larger. "First babies can be unpredictable," he said kindly. "But you're young and strong. I expect everything will go smoothly." Zachary became almost absurdly protective. He insisted on doing chores she had previously handled herself and fretted if she lifted anything heavier than a book. It was endearing and occasionally frustrating in equal measure. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she told him one evening when he tried to prevent her from reaching up to a high shelf. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while doing far more strenuous work than putting away dishes." "Those women weren't carrying my child," he countered, but he stepped back, recognizing that he was being overbearing. "I'm sorry. I want everything to be perfect. I want you both to be safe." Her irritation melted away. She took his hand and placed it on her belly, which was just beginning to show a slight curve. "We will be. I promise to be careful, but you have to trust me to know my own limits." "I do trust you." He kissed her softly. "I'll try to be less of a mother hen." "I didn't say you had to stop completely," she teased. "Just dial it back a little." As winter gave way to spring, the ranch came alive with new growth and new life. Calves were born, the garden began to sprout, and Josephine's belly swelled steadily. She felt the baby move for the first time in late April, a fluttering sensation that made her gasp and laugh with wonder. Zachary spent long minutes with his hand pressed to her stomach, waiting to feel the kicks, his face alight with amazement when he finally did. They talked about names during the long spring evenings. For a boy, they liked Samuel, after Zachary's father who had died when Zachary was young. For a girl, they considered several options before settling on Rose, after Josephine's grandmother, one of the few happy memories from her childhood. "Do you think about your family?" Zachary asked one night. "Your real family before you had to leave?" Josephine was quiet for a moment. She rarely spoke about her past, finding it easier to live entirely in the present. But marriage had made her braver, more willing to share the painful parts of herself. "Sometimes. My mother died when I was 12. My father remarried quickly, and his new wife had no interest in raising another woman's child. I left home at 16 to work in St. Louis. I haven't seen my father in 6 years, and I doubt he wonders what became of me." "His loss," Zachary said fiercely. "He missed out on knowing an incredible woman." "It's strange," she continued. "I used to think family was the most important thing. But now I realize that the family you choose can matter more than the one you're born into. You, this baby, the life we're building, this is my family now. This is what matters. We'll make it different for our children," Zachary promised. "They'll always know they're loved and wanted. They'll never have to run or hide or pretend to be someone they're not." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "That's all I want, for our children to grow up safe and free." But even as she said it, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that the past was never truly gone, that someday, somehow, it might catch up with them. She pushed the thought away, refusing to let fear poison this happiness. They had been careful. She had been Catherine Winters for nearly a year now, and no one had questioned it. Surely they were safe. Summer arrived with scorching heat that made the final months of pregnancy nearly unbearable. Josephine spent her days trying to stay cool, doing light chores in the early morning and late evening when the temperature was marginally more tolerable. The baby seemed to grow exponentially larger, and her back ached constantly. Zachary did everything he could to make her comfortable, bringing cool water from the well, fashioning a fan from palm fronds, even rigging up a makeshift shade on the porch so she could sit outside without being in direct sun. His devotion never wavered, and Josephine fell in love with him a little more each day. In mid-August, 2 weeks before the baby was due, a stranger rode into town. Josephine did not see him at first. She was at the ranch, too uncomfortable to make the trip into Nebraska City for anything less than absolute necessity. But Mrs. Haversham mentioned him when she came out to visit, bringing supplies and gossip in equal measure. "There's a man asking questions at the saloon," the older woman said as they sat on the porch shelling peas. "Says he's looking for someone who might have come through Nebraska last year. A woman, young, dark hair, might be using a different name." Josephine's hands stilled. Ice flooded her veins despite the oppressive heat. "Did he say what woman?" "No, and nobody paid him much mind. You know how drifters are, always looking for someone or running from something. But I thought I should mention it, just in case." Mrs. Haversham gave her a shrewd look. "You don't have any trouble following you, do you, dear?" "Not that I know of," Josephine lied, her voice admirably steady. "But thank you for telling me." After Mrs. Haversham left, Josephine sat on the porch, her mind racing. It could be a coincidence. There were probably dozens of young women with dark hair who had come west last year. But the description was close enough to make her nervous, and the timing felt ominous. She needed to tell Zachary. He came in at sunset, dusty and tired from a day spent moving cattle to better grazing. One look at her face and he was immediately alert. "What happened?" she told him about the stranger, watching his expression grow serious. "It might be nothing," she finished, "but I thought you should know." Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he said, "I'll ride into town tomorrow, see what I can find out. If this man is looking for you specifically, we need to know why and how to handle it. What if he's been sent by the killer? What if he's here too? She could not finish the sentence. The thought of danger coming to their home, especially now with the baby so close, was almost more than she could bear. Hey. Zachary knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. Listen to me. I will not let anyone hurt you or our baby. I swear that on everything I hold sacred. If this man is a threat, I'll deal with it. But we're not going to panic until we know more. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. But you're not alone anymore. We face this together, remember? He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Try to get some rest. I'll leave at first light and be back by afternoon. Sleep was impossible that night. Josephine lay awake, one hand on her belly feeling the baby's movements, imagining all the worst possible scenarios. What if the killer had finally tracked her down? What if everything they had built was about to be ripped away? What if Zachary got hurt trying to protect her? By morning, she had worked herself into such a state of anxiety that Zachary almost refused to leave. But she forced herself to calm down, recognizing that they needed information. Go, she told him. Just please be careful. Always am. He kissed her thoroughly, his hand resting on her swollen belly. Stay inside, keep the rifle nearby, and don't answer the door unless you know who it is. I'll be back as soon as I can. The hours after he left crawled by with agonizing slowness. Josephine tried to distract herself with household tasks, but her mind kept circling back to that stranger in town. She checked and rechecked that the doors and windows were secure, the rifle loaded and within reach. It was mid-afternoon when she heard horses approaching. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, relief flooding through her when she recognized Zachary's bay gelding. But her relief turned to confusion when she saw he was not alone. Another man rode beside him, someone unfamiliar. Zachary dismounted and walked to the house alone, his expression carefully neutral. Josephine met him at the door, the rifle still in her hands. It's all right, he said quickly, seeing her alarm. He's not a threat. His name is Deputy Marshal James Weatherby from Missouri. He wants to talk to you, but I promise you're safe. I wouldn't have brought him here otherwise. A marshal, her voice came out thin with fear. Zachary, what's happening? Trust me, he said, taking the rifle gently from her hands. Just hear him out. The marshal was a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a weathered face. He removed his hat respectfully when Zachary ushered him inside. Mrs. Holbrook, he said. Or should I say Miss Carver? Josephine's legs nearly gave out. Zachary caught her elbow, steadying her, then guided her to a chair. Before you say anything else, Zachary addressed the marshal, his voice hard, I want it understood that my wife is under my protection. Whatever you have to say, you'll say it civilly, or you'll leave my property. I understand, Mr. Holbrook, and I appreciate your concern. The marshal sat down across from Josephine, his manner non-threatening. Miss Carver, I'll use your real name if you don't mind. I've been looking for you since last October. I'm not here to arrest you or cause you trouble. I'm here because we caught the man who killed Mr. Thornton. Josephine's breath caught. You caught him 3 months ago in Kansas City. He got into a gunfight with local law over an unrelated matter. During questioning, he confessed to several crimes, including the murder of Richard Thornton. He said there had been a witness, a young woman who worked in the household. We've been trying to locate you ever since to let you know you're safe. There's no need to hide anymore. The room seemed to tilt. Josephine gripped the arms of the chair, trying to process what she was hearing. He confessed. He's in custody, he was. He died in prison 2 weeks ago, stabbed by another inmate. But before he died, his confession cleared up several unsolved cases. You're not in danger anymore, Miss Carver. The man who wanted to silence you is dead. Tears started streaming down her face, relief so profound it was almost painful. Zachary knelt beside her chair, his arm around her shoulders. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe." "I need to tell you something else," the marshal continued. "When we started looking for you, we discovered that you'd taken on a false identity. Catherine Winters. Under normal circumstances, that could be a legal issue. But given that you were fleeing for your life from a credible threat, and given that you've clearly built a respectable life here, I've recommended to my superiors that no charges be filed. As far as the law is concerned, what you did was understandable self-preservation. So she's free?" Zachary asked, his voice tight with tension. "Completely free, completely. Though I would suggest, Mrs. Holbrook, that you might want to legally change your name to avoid complications down the road. A good lawyer could file the paperwork to make Catherine Winters your official name, or you could revert to Josephine Carver, whichever you prefer. But that's up to you." Josephine looked at Zachary through her tears. "What do you think I should do?" "I think," he said slowly, "that you should choose whatever name feels right to you. You're my wife no matter what you're called, but if you want my opinion, Josephine Holbrook has a nice ring to it." "Josephine Holbrook," she repeated. The name felt like freedom. "Yes, that's who I want to be." The marshal smiled. "Then that's who you'll be. I'll help you get the paperwork sorted out before I head back to Missouri." He stood up, settling his hat back on his head. "I'm glad I found you, Mrs. Holbrook, and I'm glad you found safety and happiness here. You deserve it after everything you went through." After the marshal left, Josephine collapsed into Zachary's arms, sobbing with relief and residual fear and overwhelming emotion. He held her through it all, murmuring reassurances, his own voice thick with feeling. "It's really over," she said when she could finally speak. "I don't have to be afraid anymore. No more running, no more hiding. You're Josephine Holbrook, wife of Zachary Holbrook, soon to be mother of our child, and you're home." He kissed her hair, her face, her lips. "I love you so much." "I love you too." She laughed through her tears. "We're going to be all right. We're really going to be all right." 2 weeks later, on a hot September night, Josephine went into labor. It started with a dull ache in her back that gradually intensified into unmistakable contractions. Zachary immediately rode for Dr. Patterson while one of the cowboys went to fetch Mrs. Haversham and the doctor's wife, who would assist with the birth. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following afternoon. Josephine had never experienced such pain, but she held onto Zachary's hand and pushed through it, focusing on the fact that soon they would meet their child. "You're doing wonderfully," Mrs. Patterson encouraged. "Just a little more, dear. I can see the head." With one final, tremendous effort, Josephine pushed, and suddenly the room was filled with a thin, outraged cry. Dr. Patterson lifted a squalling, red-faced baby, announcing, "It's a boy. You have a son, a son." Josephine collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but exhilarated. Zachary was openly crying, his face alight with wonder as he watched the women clean and wrap the baby. When they finally placed the tiny bundle in Josephine's arms, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered, studying the tiny perfect face, the dark wisp of hair, the small fists waving in the air. "We've been waiting for you." Zachary sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, gazing down at their son with an expression of such profound love that Josephine's eyes filled with fresh tears. "He's perfect," Zachary said hoarsely. "You're both perfect." Little Samuel Holbrook was indeed perfect, despite doing very little in those first weeks except eat, sleep, and cry. Josephine threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she applied to everything. though she quickly discovered that taking care of an infant was far more exhausting than she had anticipated. But Zachary was a hands-on father, walking the floor with Samuel when he fussed at night, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with such obvious adoration that it made Josephine fall in love with him all over again. Life on the ranch continued its rhythms around the new arrival. The cowboys took turns peeking in at the baby, these rough men suddenly soft-voiced and gentle around the tiny infant. Mrs. Haversham visited regularly, bringing meals and advice. Even some of Josephine's former students came out with their mothers to meet the newest member of the community. As autumn painted the prairie in golds and reds, Josephine felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. She had a husband who loved her, a healthy son, a home that was truly hers. The fear that had haunted her for so long had finally released its grip. She was Josephine Holbrook now, legally and officially, the paperwork having been finalized with the marshal's help. Her old life as Josephine Carver was behind her, and Catherine Winters, the borrowed identity that had saved her, was laid to rest with gratitude. One evening in late October, after Samuel had finally fallen asleep, Josephine and Zachary sat together on the porch watching the sunset. The air had turned crisp with the promise of winter, but wrapped in Zachary's arms with a quilt around them both, Josephine felt perfectly warm. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Marrying me knowing what you knew, the complications, the secrets, all of it." Zachary was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Then he said, "Not for 1 second. Yes, it was complicated. Yes, there were risks. But Josephine, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You took a house and made it a home. You gave me a son. You gave me a reason to be more than just a rancher surviving day to day. You made me want to build something lasting, something meaningful." He tipped her face up to his gray eyes intense in the fading light. "I knew who you really were from the start, and I fell in love with you anyway. That's never going to change." "I fell in love with you too," she said. "Even when I was terrified of what it meant, I couldn't help it. You made me feel safe when I thought I'd never feel safe again. You are safe. We both are. And we're going to grow old together on this ranch, watching our children grow up, building a legacy." He kissed her softly. "That's my promise to you." "Children plural?" she asked with a smile. "Are you planning on more already?" "Only if you want them, but I wouldn't say no to a daughter or 2. Or 3. His grin was teasing, but there was genuine hope in his eyes. "Let's get through Samuel's first year before we start planning siblings," she laughed. "But yes, I'd like more children. A big family, the kind I always wished I had growing up. Then that's what we'll have." He pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew from infant to toddler, a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch. When he was 2, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1883 she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, fulfilling Zachary's wish for a little girl. Rose had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had Zachary wrapped around her tiny finger. Samuel was initially suspicious of this small creature who demanded so much attention, but he gradually warmed to his role as big brother, becoming fiercely protective of his little sister. The ranch prospered under Zachary's management. He expanded the herd, improved the breeding stock, and built a reputation for producing quality cattle. The Double H became one of the most successful operations in eastern Nebraska. But for all his business acumen, Zachary never lost sight of what mattered most: his family. Josephine occasionally thought about returning to teaching, but her days were full with managing the household, raising the children, and helping with the ranch operations. She taught Samuel and Rose their letters and numbers, read to them every night, and made sure they grew up curious and kind. In many ways, she was still teaching, just in a different classroom. When Samuel was 5 and Rose was 3, Josephine became pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy resulted in twin boys, born during a spring thunderstorm in 1886. They named them Thomas and Henry, and suddenly the house was overflowing with children and chaos and joy. Zachary hired additional help for Josephine, recognizing that 4 children under 7 was a tremendous amount of work. A young woman from town, Emma, came in several days a week to help with the cooking and cleaning, allowing Josephine to focus more on the children. It was a luxury Josephine had never imagined having, but one she was grateful for. The children grew up wild and free on the prairie, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were able, and absorbing the values their parents worked hard to instill: honesty, hard work, compassion, and respect for the land. Samuel inherited his father's quiet strength and his mother's sharp mind. Rose was spirited and imaginative, always concocting elaborate games for her younger brothers. Thomas and Henry were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together with such regularity that Zachary joked they needed their own personal supervisor. Through it all, Josephine and Zachary's love for each other deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, as any couple does, about how to discipline the children, how to manage the ranch finances, whether to expand further or consolidate what they had. But they always worked through their conflicts with respect and communication, remembering what they had overcome to build this life together. In the summer of 1890, when Samuel was nearly 11, a man came to the ranch asking for work. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a weathered face and the look of someone who had lived a hard life. Something about him seemed familiar to Josephine, though she could not place why. Zachary hired him on for the haying season, and the man who gave his name as John Carter proved to be a capable worker. But Josephine found herself watching him uneasily, that sense of familiarity nagging at her. It was Rose, observant as always, who made the connection. "Mama," she said one evening at dinner, "that new man, Mr. Carter, he has eyes like yours, the same color." Josephine's fork clattered against her plate. Carver. Could it possibly be that night after the children were in bed she told Zachary her suspicion? "I think he might be my father. The name is slightly different, but Rose is right, his eyes are the same unusual shade of hazel as mine." "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" Zachary asked immediately. "No." Josephine surprised herself with the certainty of her answer. "I want to talk to him. If it is him, I need to know why he's here." The next day she approached John Carter as he was working near the barn. Up close, there was no doubt. Despite the years and the hard living that had aged him prematurely, this was her father. "Hello, Pa," she said quietly. He froze, then slowly straightened, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Josie, my God, I thought I wasn't sure it was you. You're calling yourself Holbrook now. It's my married name, and I go by Josephine now, not Josie." She crossed her arms, defensive. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for work, same as I told your husband." He removed his hat, twisting it in his hands. "But also I heard in town that Mrs. Holbrook used to be Josephine Carver, that she came from St. Louis about 11 years ago. I thought maybe, possibly, it could be you. My daughter." "The daughter you didn't care about. The one you let your new wife push out so you wouldn't be inconvenienced." He flinched, but did not deny it. "I was a coward. I chose easy over right, and I've regretted it every day since. Marry my second wife. She left me 5 years ago. Took everything and ran off with a traveling salesman. I've been drifting ever since, trying to find work, trying to figure out where I went wrong." He looked at her with eyes full of pain and regret. "When I heard there might be a Josephine Carver here, I had to come see. Had to know if my little girl was all right." Josephine felt tears stinging her eyes, though whether from anger or sorrow or some combination of both, she could not say. "I'm not your little girl anymore. I haven't been for a long time. I know, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve to ask for it." He swallowed hard. "But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. From what I've seen, you've built a good life here. You have a fine husband, beautiful children, respect in the community. You did all that without me, and I'm more sorry than I can say that I wasn't there to help." They stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Josephine said, "You can stay for the rest of the haying season. You'll work like any other hand and be paid fairly. After that, we'll see." "That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Josephine." She turned to walk away, then paused. "Pa, don't disappoint me again. I don't have much patience left for people who let me down." "I won't. I swear I won't." Over the following weeks, Josephine watched her father carefully. He worked hard, kept to himself, and was unfailingly polite to everyone. Samuel and Rose were curious about this man their mother seemed to have a complicated relationship with, and eventually, Josephine sat them down and explained that he was their grandfather, but that he had not been a good father to her when she was young. "Is he trying to be better now?" Samuel asked with the straightforward logic of a child. "I think he is," Josephine admitted. "Then maybe we should give him a chance," Rose suggested. "That's what you always tell us, that people can change if they really want to." Out of the mouths of children. Josephine discussed it with Zachary that night, and he listened carefully before offering his opinion. "It's your decision entirely. He's your father and you're the one he hurt. But from what I've observed, he seems genuinely remorseful, and the children have a point about second chances. God knows I wouldn't have the life I have now if someone hadn't been willing to give me one." Gradually, cautiously, Josephine began to let her father back into her life. It started with inviting him to Sunday dinners, then allowing him to teach Samuel how to carve wood, a skill he apparently had. By the time autumn arrived, John Carter had become a semi-permanent fixture at the Double H, living in the bunkhouse, but taking meals with the family more often than not. He was good with the children, patient and kind in ways Josephine did not remember from her own childhood. Perhaps losing everything had taught him what truly mattered, or perhaps age had softened him. Whatever the reason, she found herself slowly, carefully forgiving him. Not forgetting the past could not be erased, but forgiving nonetheless. "I'm grateful," he told her one evening after the children had gone to bed. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "I know I don't deserve this, another chance with you, but I'm grateful every single day." "You're my father," Josephine said simply. "And my children deserve to know their grandfather. Just don't make me regret this." "I won't. I promise you that," and he kept that promise. John Carter became a beloved figure to Samuel, Rose, Thomas, and Henry, telling them stories, teaching them skills, and providing an extra pair of hands and eyes to help Josephine and Zachary manage their growing brood. As the 1890s progressed, life on the Double H continued its steady rhythm. The children grew from infants to children to teenagers. Samuel showed an aptitude for ranch management that pleased Zachary immensely. Rose revealed a talent for art, sketching the prairie landscape with remarkable skill. Thomas and Henry remained inseparable, eventually expressing interest in going to the new agricultural college in Lincoln to learn modern farming techniques. Josephine and Zachary aged together gracefully. silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes from years of laughter and sun. But their love remained as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for being tested and proven through the years. In the spring of 1895, when Josephine was 40 years old and Zachary was 46, they took a rare trip alone together to Omaha for a cattle buyers' convention. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch and children for more than a day or two since Samuel was born. Walking through the city together, dining in restaurants, sleeping in a hotel room without the possibility of being interrupted by children, it felt like a second honeymoon. They laughed more than they had in months, talked about dreams and plans, and remembered why they had fallen in love in the first place. "You ever think about that day at the station?" Josephine asked one evening as they walked along the Missouri River. "When I gave that dead woman's name and you were listening in the shadows." "All the time," Zachary admitted. "I think about how easily I could have walked away, decided it wasn't my business. I almost did, you know. Almost just went home and forgot I'd seen anything suspicious." "What made you come back? Why did you decide to tell me you knew?" He stopped walking, turning to face her. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks behind him. "Because when I looked at you, I saw something I recognized. A survivor. Someone who'd been knocked down by life but refused to stay down. And I thought, maybe that's someone worth knowing. Maybe that's someone who could understand what it's like to start over, to build something new from the ashes of what came before." "And was I?" she asked softly. "Was I worth knowing?" "You were worth everything," he said, pulling her close. "You are everything. My wife, my partner, the mother of my children, the love of my life. You took a scared girl running from danger and turned her into a strong woman who built a home and a family. That's not just worth knowing, that's worth spending a lifetime celebrating." Josephine kissed him there on the riverbank, not caring who might see, pouring 16 years of love and gratitude into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. "I love you, Zachary Holbrook," she said. "Thank you for knowing my secret and marrying me anyway." "I love you, Josephine Holbrook," he replied. "Thank you for trusting me with your truth and building this beautiful life with me." They returned to the ranch rejuvenated, ready to face whatever the future held. And the future held plenty. Samuel's eventual marriage to a rancher's daughter from the next county over, producing the first grandchildren. Rose's decision to attend art school in Chicago, much to everyone's surprise, where she thrived and eventually married a fellow artist. Thomas and Henry going to agricultural college as planned, then returning to help expand the Double H operations into new territory. Through it all, Josephine and Zachary remained the steady center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They celebrated births and mourned deaths. They weathered droughts and harsh winters. They adapted to the changing world around them as the Wild West of their youth gave way to the more settled 20th century. John Carter lived to see his great-grandchildren, passing away peacefully in his sleep in 1902 at the age of 71, reconciled with his daughter and surrounded by the family he had once abandoned, but eventually learned to cherish. In the summer of 1915, Josephine and Zachary celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch. Samuel and his wife had produced 3 children. Rose and her husband had 2. Thomas had married and had twins, while Henry had 4 children with his wife. The house overflowed with laughter and chaos and love. That evening, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Josephine and Zachary sat on the porch as they had so many thousands of times before. She was 60 now, he was 66, and their bodies showed the wear of hard-lived lives. But when he looked at her, Zachary still saw the frightened young woman who had stepped off that train so long ago. And when she looked at him, Josephine still saw the cowboy who had known her secret and chosen love over judgment. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked, echoing a question from decades earlier. "Not a single one," he said without hesitation. "Every choice I made, starting with deciding to speak to you that day at the schoolhouse, led me here. To this life, this family, this moment. How could I regret any of it?" "I regret that I didn't meet you sooner," Josephine admitted, "that we didn't have even more years together." "We have the years we have, and we've made them count." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the wedding ring she had never removed. "Besides, we're not done yet. I plan on being around to annoy you for at least another couple of decades." She laughed, the sound as bright as it had been when she was 25. "Is that a promise or a threat?" "It's a guarantee." He kissed her hand gallantly. "Till death do us part, remember, and I'm not planning on death anytime soon." They sat together as the stars emerged, mapping out plans for the future with the same optimism and determination that had carried them through the past 35 years. There would be more grandchildren to spoil, more land to steward, more sunsets to watch together. The years continued to pass. Zachary and Josephine aged into their 70s, eventually handing over the day-to-day ranch operations to Samuel, while remaining active advisors and beloved family patriarchs. They watched their grandchildren grow into adults, saw some of them go off to the First World War and thankfully return home safely, and welcomed great-grandchildren into the fold. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other, the kind of couple people pointed to as an example of enduring love. Young people would ask them the secret to a long marriage, and Zachary would always say the same thing. "We chose each other knowing exactly who we were, flaws, secrets, and all, and we kept choosing each other every single day after." In the autumn of 1925, after 50 years of marriage, Zachary fell ill with pneumonia. Despite Josephine's care and the best efforts of doctors far more advanced than old Dr. Patterson had been, he did not recover. He passed away peacefully in their bed at the age of 76, holding Josephine's hand until his last breath. The grief nearly destroyed her. After half a century of partnership, of waking up next to him every morning and falling asleep beside him every night, the emptiness was almost unbearable. But she was surrounded by the family they had built together, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all of whom carried pieces of Zachary in their faces, their mannerisms, their values. Samuel found her one evening sitting on the porch alone, staring out at the prairie. "He loved you so much, Mama," he said gently. "Right up until the very end, I know." Josephine wiped her eyes. "And I loved him, more than I ever thought possible to love another person." "Tell me the story again," Samuel asked, "about how you met, how he knew your secret and married you anyway." So Josephine told him, her voice growing stronger as she remembered. She told him about arriving at the station with a false name and a carpet bag full of fear, about the cowboy in the shadows who had heard everything, about the moment he had confronted her in the schoolhouse and offered protection instead of judgment, about falling in love despite the risks, about building a life together from nothing but hope and determination. "He saved me," she concluded. "Not just from danger, but from loneliness, from fear, from the belief that I didn't deserve happiness. He showed me what love could be when it was given freely and completely." "He would say you saved him right back," Samuel said. "He told me once that before you, he was just surviving. You gave him something to live for." Josephine smiled through her tears. "We saved each other then. That's the truth of it." She lived for 7 more years after Zachary's death, remaining active and engaged despite her grief. She taught her great-grandchildren their letters, passed on family recipes and stories, and maintained the garden she had started more than 50 years earlier. But everyone could see that part of her had gone with Zachary, that she was simply marking time until they could be together again. In the spring of 1932, Josephine Holbrook passed away in her sleep at the age of 77. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful and still, wearing the nightgown Zachary had always said was his favorite. On her bedside table was a faded photograph of the two of them from their wedding day, both young and hopeful and impossibly in love. They buried her next to Zachary in the family plot overlooking the prairie they had both loved so much. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Nebraska children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren, along with friends and neighbors whose families had known the Holbrooks for generations. At the service, Samuel spoke about his mother's courage, her kindness, and the legacy of love she and Zachary had left behind. "My father once told me that my mother arrived in Nebraska running from danger and hiding behind a dead woman's name. He knew the truth, and he married her anyway because he saw who she really was beneath the fear and the deception. They built something extraordinary together, not just a ranch or a family, but a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances. They taught us that it doesn't matter where you come from or what mistakes you've made. What matters is the life you build and the love you give. That's the greatest gift they left us." The Double H Ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and eventually his children after him, each generation building on the foundation that Zachary and Josephine had laid. The story of how they met the woman with the borrowed name and the cowboy who knew her secret became family legend, passed down through the years as an example of true love overcoming impossible odds. And if you visit the family cemetery on the Double H Ranch even now, you can still see their graves side by side, the headstones weathered but the inscription clear. Zachary Holbrook, beloved husband and father, and Josephine Holbrook, beloved wife and mother. Beneath Josephine's name, added at Samuel's request, is a single line that tells the whole story. "She came running, he saw truth, they found home." It is the ending they deserved, not perfect or without pain, but complete. A life fully lived, a love fully given, a family fully realized. From that moment at the train station when a frightened young woman gave a dead woman's name, and a watchful cowboy heard every word, through 50 years of marriage and beyond, they had built something that lasted, something that mattered. They had found each other in a wild and dangerous time, two people with secrets and scars who chose to trust despite every reason not to. And from that trust, from that leap of faith into the unknown, they had created a legacy that would endure for generations. That, in the end, is what love does. It transforms fear into courage, secrets into honesty, strangers into family. It takes broken pieces and makes them whole. It turns a borrowed name into a real life and a chance encounter into forever. Josephine Carver had stepped off that train expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she found everything: home, family, purpose, and a love so deep and true that it sustained her through half a century and beyond. And Zachary Holbrook, the cowboy who had seen through her deception to the remarkable woman beneath, found the same. Together, they proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings, that happy endings are possible even for those who start their stories running scared. That love, when it's real and freely given, can overcome anything, even death itself, leaving behind memories and lessons that echo through time. Their story ended not with a desperate flight or a borrowed identity, but with peace and fulfillment and the knowledge that they had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for? What more could any love story truly hope to be? And so the tale of the woman who gave a dead woman's name at the station, and the cowboy who knew and married her anyway, comes to its proper close not with uncertainty or questions, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived and a love that truly conquered all. Their beginning was marked by secrets and fear, but their ending was filled with truth, family, and the kind of love that poets write about and people remember long after the principals are gone. It was, in every sense, a love story for the ages. One that began in deception but ended in the deepest truth of all, that two people who choose each other freely, knowing each other fully, can build something that lasts forever. That home is not a place but a person, and family is not just blood but choice. That the Wild West may have been wild, but it was also a place where new beginnings were possible and second chances were real. Josephine and Zachary had their happy ending, hard-won and fully earned. And their story reminds us all that no matter how dark the beginning, no matter how frightening the journey, love has the power to lead us home.